So, I don't know about you, but I do not get happy from reading reviews on my paper. What happens if I get reviews? So the typical outcome is that my paper gets rejected. And what that means is people don't see the value in my work. Not something to be very excited or very happy about. Or I get a revise and resubmit. And that means that I have to jump through some additional hoops that I didn't necessarily think were worth jumping through. Also, not a very happy outcome. And so when I was younger, oftentimes these reviews would make me a little bit angry. And anger is an emotion that's associated with a lack of control. You feel like you're out of control. People control what you need to do. And that can cause some feelings of anger and some negative emotions. And so over time, I have started viewing this process of dealing with reviews a little bit different. And I have started viewing dealing with reviews as part of a persuasion game. So basically, to get published, we need to convince other people that our paper is worth getting published. And so the worst way of convincing other people of that fact is to treat them with disrespect or to view them and treat them as incompetent. And you raise all these issues in your reviews, you don't know what you're saying, you don't know what you're doing. If that's your approach to dealing with reviews, that's not going to be very helpful. In my opinion, the best way to convince other people is to ask yourself the question, why was I not persuasive enough this time? That means you can ask yourself the question, what could I have done better? If you do that, what you're basically doing is you're taking back control. You're saying this was an outcome, but I'm in control of that outcome. And maybe I can do better. And so what I now started doing is when I get reviews in, I look at the outcome and I kind of scan the reviews, but I don't read them very thoroughly. It's not going to help me to read when I'm in that state of negative emotion of having a reject or having a major and risky revision. Carefully reading reviews at that point in time is not going to help me understand what I need to do to make my paper better. So this approach of seeing the review process, navigating the review process as part of a persuasion game, what this does is, if, for instance, a reviewer makes a weird point, instead of thinking this is a weird reviewer, what I now do is I try to understand where that point came from. Maybe there's something that I wrote in my paper that caused that reaction. And let me see if I can identify what caused that particular weird point. And if I can identify it, then I can address it. I can eliminate that type of reaction. It's also important to recognize that we all have blind spots, especially with respect to our own work. So here too, ask yourself the question, what are the points that the reviewers make that I should have addressed or at least recognized? And in my experience, even if you think that some reviewers are making points that are not really very good, and on occasion that can happen, in my experience, every reviewer has at least one valid point to make. Every reviewer has a gem in there, or a little piece of a gem, I guess, in their reviews. And so here too, it's important to look at what they're saying and try to understand why they're saying it and how to address it. On each of these points reviewers make, you can ask yourself the question, does addressing this point make my paper worse? If it does make your paper worse, then push back, obviously. You don't want to accommodate a comment that is going to weaken your paper. But if it doesn't make your paper worse, you also could ask yourself the question, what's the harm in addressing it? If somebody asks for an additional analysis and you feel it's not necessary, but it also does not hurt your paper, why wouldn't you do it? Why would you push back on that? And then finally, I think it's also important that we all recognize the resources that go into reviewing. So for every paper that you submit, there's 4 or 5 people looking at your paper. There's an editor, an AE, and 2 or 3 reviewers. So for every paper that you submit, you create work for other people. And so that means that ideally we don't misuse the system. And so one of the fundamental ways of misusing a system is when you get a reject from one journal, is to just submit that paper as if, without making any changes. And I think that's not wise. First of all, you may get the same reviewers, or at least one of the same reviewers again, and these people are going to be upset because you treated them with disrespect. They gave you comments and you did nothing with those comments. And that's not going to help you moving forward. But also, even if your paper is rejected at some journal, as I said before, there probably are several valid points in what the review team gave you. And addressing these points will make your paper better. Addressing these points, again, viewing it as a persuasion game, will make your paper more persuasive to potentially other reviewers. So I would urge you to never submit a paper that got rejected at one journal to another journal without making any changes.